Good morning and a very warm welcome to this EPC update and post-summit briefing, our regular look at key developments in and around the European Union. My name is Jackie Davis. I'm a senior advisor to the European Policy Centre, and with me this week, as always, Fabian Zulig, CEO and Chief Economist at the EPC, and Yanis Emanuelidis, Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Studies, as we discuss the outcome of yesterday's informal EU summit in Copenhagen and analyse whether EU leaders really did make any progress on building their common defence readiness and on supporting Ukraine. As always, totally interactive conversation. I have some questions for Yanis and Fabian. If you have a question, either click on the raised hands button and I will unmute you when the time comes, or write your question in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A, and please be brief. Okay, we have a lot to discuss, so let's dive straight in. And Yanis, we don't have so many of these informal summits hosted by EU presidencies as we used to. Why did the Danish presidency call this summit, and what were they there to talk about?
Well, it was because which has been on the table for such a long time, European defense, support for Ukraine in many forms. They wanted to have an informal, open strategic exchange about the issue in preparation of the ordinary European Council meeting on the 23rd and 24th of October. So it was in preparation to make progress so that final decisions can be taken at the end of the month. They had intense discussions, which we will be discussing. Question mark is how much headway did they really make in view of preparing for the European Council meeting at the end of the month. And as we know, President Costa wants the conclusions of the European Council meetings to be drafted well ahead or ahead of the meeting so that they actually do not have to work on the conclusions and the decisions which are taken. But even at the European Council, the formal one at the end of the month, rather have everything settled before that. I'm not sure that he was able to get that this time around.
Let's come back on that at the end and assess where today's outcome leaves us for that next summit. But broadly, Fabian, in terms of the point of this summit, I mean, we often hear summits these days being called the decisive moment. This is it. This is when EU leaders really have to knuckle down and do what is necessary. This one was billed as potentially momentous, was it?
I think it depends on whether you look at it from the perspective of the context in which this has been happening or the outcomes of it. In terms of the context, clearly we are in a different phase. We have seen the aggression from Russia on NATO airspace over the last weeks. We've seen seemingly a change of heart in the White House, which has led to a maybe reappreciation of what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, but I'm sure we'll get back into that. So there was a lot of momentum in that sense. What we haven't seen is that this momentum has been enough to actually get us to the decisions. If you are being very kind, then you could say, well, it was in preparation for the actual council, so we couldn't expect decisions at this stage. But there doesn't seem to be much indication that on some of the crucial issues there's much movement.
And we did, just to follow up on that, and let's turn immediately to the first of those two issues, which they spent a great deal of time discussing, the common defence readiness. As you say, a lot of momentum, very intense discussion, lots of warnings about how grave the situation is, and our relationship with Russia, and of course those recent Russian incursion into EU airspace. But in terms of the focus of the conversation, Fabian, did they actually make any progress? Let's take the issue of the incursions first, and what could be done to support member states on the EU's eastern flank. I think there was quite a lot of contentions about this idea of a drone wall. It doesn't seem, they all agree something must be done, but do they agree on what that something should be? Fabian.
I think we have seen a development in this area. this already was trailed in a sense in Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union. This appreciation that we have to do more on the eastern flank.
Mm.
Now, clearly, the urgency of that has increased, given that we have not only seen incursions into our airspace, but also the mismatch between the means which are available and the drones being used by Russia. Clearly, we cannot have $1 million equipment chasing after $1,000 drones. This is a mismatch which needs to be addressed.
Mm.
But then when it comes, as so often, to what does that mean in practical terms? What are we going to do? Then you see very many different member state positions, people warning about how much time it is going to take, who's going to pay for it, who's going to take the lead. Is it something the Commission should be doing, or is it something which is done through NATO? So when it comes to these details, there is no agreement. So while
Mm.
overall, I think most countries very much accept the need for doing more, but there's at this moment in time no agreement on the means of doing that and how we actually get this on the ground.
And when Yanis, one very concrete project that was proposal that was on the table was this idea of a drone wall to detect and shoot down drones that fly over the eastern member states. But Macron and Merz both very critical of it, and Macron saying, I thought with more than a hint of irritation, it needs a little more sophistication. Is this a sign that the proposals were not necessarily as well prepared as they need to be? Or is it a sign of the difficulties that Fabian was just pointing to with different member states wanting to go further or less far?
I think there are always different reasons, but it's more of the latter. But it's also interesting that yesterday had obviously scheduled that they would talk about defense, but it took them much longer. The discussion on defense took much longer than they had anticipated. They were actually thinking of coming back and having another session of the informal European Council meeting after the dinner, which is associated with the European Political Community meeting, which is happening today. They didn't do so, but it took them more time because every member of the European Council wanted to speak. And it was the Danish presidency was pushing to allow them to do so because there are all these differences among them, and I'll come back to these differences. When it comes to the European drone wall, this is one of the flagship proposals that have been set down. So it's the European drone wall, Eastern Flank Watch, air defense shield, defense space shield, and there is now special urgency with respect to the drone wall and Eastern Flank Watch. And there is opposition from different corners to the drone wall. You're already referring to Metz and to Macron, who are saying this is not sophisticated enough. They were also saying it is too expensive. The German finance minister also said it will take too much time to set it up. Then there are, industrial interests, which are particular because there are similar projects happening at the national level. And then there are power considerations in terms of, who will be running the show. Will it be the Commission or
But
member states? And there are
I'll
also
come back on that
geopolitical.
point in a minute. But the problem with all of that, Yanis, is the urgency of the situation. Yes,
Yes,
it's complicated, but we don't have the time to wrangle over these issues indefinitely. Have we not reached, it's
but
often said with the EU, you have to be
no.
peering over the precipice before you make a decision. Are we not at the point yet where EU leaders are saying, oh, okay, now we have to do it?
I think if we follow our own conversations since 2022, I think we would argue that we've been at that point in time already for a while.
Mm,
And the level of urgency is extremely high. Then you have concrete incidences like what we're now seeing with drones and airspace, and not only in one country, but in many member states, plus Norway. So the provocations are increasing, and that makes it a special urgency. But that is something which you could be aware of. So what is now happening with respect to drones, there will be something else. There will be
mm,
other hybrid forms of trying to put pressure on us, trying to test how united we are, how we are able to actually find solutions at the European level, how much we can depend on Trump. And we will discuss that later on too, again. But so this is a provocation, a testing of us. And actually, we're not up to the level and the speed when it comes to doing things at the European level. Now, yes, we're doing more things at the national level, but in things of doing things at the European level, and there are manifold reasons, not only one reason, we're not up to the speed.
Yeah, but it would seem, Fabian, that we need to do the two things in tandem. So there are the more long-term, how do we build this common defence readiness for the long term? How do we gear up? And there's a lot of discussion around that. But these incursions are happening now, and the arguments over how to respond are continuing. Do you believe that we are coming to a point where EU leaders will say, okay, now we have to do something and we have to do it quickly? We can worry about the longer term, and I want to come back on the governance issues in a minute and all of that, but we need to do something about these incursions right now. Fabian.
Oh, sorry, it's cutting out a bit. I think we have to clearly make a distinction. There's a question of what is the response at this moment in time when these incidents happen, and what do we need to put into place as a longer term strategy to deal with these kind of incidents. When it comes to the latter, that will take some time. The question is how long, but certainly this is not going to happen overnight because we don't have the systems in place at the moment. So in that sense, it is urgent, but it is not going to produce immediate results. When it comes to what we do with the incursions at this moment in time, I think that's a very delicate question. And there, I think, is also a need to very much coordinate with the US in terms of what the response should look like. But clearly, there's a worry in many countries that we could go down an escalatory route, which would be very dangerous at this moment.
Just on the issue of governance, Yanis, that you mentioned earlier, one of the issues is whether, and Ursula von der Leyen appears to be trying to centralize this and say when it comes to these flagship initiatives, the Commission should be in the driving seat. We need to centralize all of this. Member states pushing back on that and saying, no, we want to retain control over the shaping of these initiatives and so on through the European Defence Agency, as well as NATO's role. How do you see that argument unfolding? And in this sense, is Ursula von der Leyen overplaying her hand? Has she got this one wrong?
First of all, I think it's important to note, because not everyone is following this in detail, that in view of the meeting they had yesterday, the Commission came up with a scoping paper. Scoping paper which relates to the readiness roadmap 2030, which the European Council is supposed to adopt at the end of the month. So there is a paper which was discussed, or which was at least underlying the discussion yesterday, spanning on all the different issues we're talking about. So it includes the capabilities gap, it includes issues related to governance, and I'll come to that in a second. It relates to issues related to the relationship with the Ukraine. So it spans the industrial element of the entire equation. So it spans across all different kinds of different elements in order to get to what they call the readiness roadmap. Now, with respect to the governance process, if you look at what they have forward in the scoping paper, it has a system in place, or it offers a system of how things should happen in future. And they want the European councils in October in future to deal with capabilities, to deal with defense, and to take decisions, strategic decisions. And the idea is that it starts with an overview of member states' capabilities, state of play, and what their objectives are. And this is being done, should be done by the EU military staff. Then there's a role for the European Defence Agency to come up with what they call a coordinated annual review on defence, which is yearly updated with an analysis of where the shortfalls are, what needs to be done at the European level. Even the Chief of Defence Staffs are involved in this process. And then it comes to the Commission and the High Representative, let's not forget the Commission and the High Representative, who should present what they call an annual defence readiness report, where they look at the situation, and an aggregate dimension, looking into what capabilities does the EU have, the member states have collectively, in order to then define what needs to be done and take decisions at the European Council level. This is what they have proposed. And there is even back pushing on that from member states, because they feel that this is giving too much role to Brussels, not only to the Commission, because it includes the military staff, the European Defense Agency, the Chief of Staff, Defense Staff. So it includes also the national elements in the proposal. But even when it comes to this, there is pushback because there's the fear that Brussels will decide too much. And let's not also forget, there's also a lack of confidence and trust among member states that if you have something which is centralized, that might then not work because you cannot trust that others will do what needs to be done.
So can they find a way through this?
I think that they will find a way. I think the EU has proven to find a way when it comes to
Through
governance.
almost anything.
To find a way, yes. And even if you have to downscale it, something will come out of it. By the way, also something will come out of it when it comes to the European drone wall. Obviously, it will not be called drone wall. Everybody, the Danish Prime Minister sitting together in the press conference didn't even put these words into her mouth, and she was being asked about why she didn't mention the word. So it will be called differently. It will probably be downscaled, but something will happen. And also, I think with respect to the governance system, but that doesn't change the underlying problem. The underlying problem is look into the drones issues. We've seen in the war in Ukraine the role of drones. So why are we surprised that drones now play a stronger role? Why don't we start preparing for that a year, 2 years, 3 years ago? We always wait, and then we are often too late. And as we know, when it comes to defense and capabilities, it doesn't take months. It takes years, maybe even a decade to set up the capabilities.
Indeed. And I wanted to ask Fabian about the joint capability development. And we've had a lot of talk about the defence industry and ramping up the defence industry. Are you feeling that there is real progress in this area? Maybe not in terms of summit declarations and so on, but on the ground. Is the EU, and we're going to come to Donald Trump later, and the EU having to step up now and not rely on the US, do you believe that in terms of that capability development and having the defense industry we need, that we're where we need to be, or are we at least getting nearer to it?
We are making steps in the right direction. Unfortunately, they are slow. They are not as decisive as they need to be. I think what we are still seeing is also systemic delays, as far as we can hear from industry, from the parts which are supposed to produce this. All of the activity so far is not translating into signatures under contracts, which are then being translated into real capability. And I think in the end, we are still, unfortunately, in the area of what we've called the progress illusion. That yes, we are making steps forward, but the scale, scope, and speed of what we are doing is not matching the scale, scope, and speed of the challenges which we are facing.
Okay, but Costa, and I will come to you, Yanis, but Antonio Costa did say ahead of the summit in his invitation letter to the EU leaders, and I'm quoting, "The direction of travel is clear. We are building a Europe capable of responding effectively, autonomously, and together to today's and tomorrow's threats." I'm desperately trying to end this part of our conversation on a slightly more positive note. Would you agree at least that the direction of travel is clear? And as Fabian was indicating there, we are, although not at the pace we need to, beginning to make progress towards that? Or is this putting far too positive a gloss on things?
Yes, I can concur to that. We understand what we need to do. We know what the direction of travel is. We even have proposals on the table of what we need to do in concrete terms. They still need to define milestones when it comes, for example, to defense capabilities, but still there is, there are ideas of how a governance structure could look like and so forth. But all that, there's a big question mark, is incremental progress enough? And if this is one of the test of times which we have, by the way, we also have a test of times when it comes to, for example, economic competitiveness or enlargement and reform. So we have a number of tests of times. And are we failing the test of times? I think yes, because we're not living up to the necessary needs of what we need to do. And the problem is that if you look into why we're failing, you see the difference, the difference between member states and the reasons why we're failing to have the pace we require. There are manifold reasons. I already mentioned the lack of trust. We already mentioned, the national economic industrial interests, the lack of of a sense of urgency, which is similar in member states. Geopolitics very much matter. The Greeks, the Spanish, the Italians have other concerns. They're also saying with respect to the drone wall that needs to cover also us, not only the north or northwest of the continent. We have the fear of the power grab from Brussels. We have the wish of some that you will not succeed, that it will fail the test of time, so that you will hollow out from within. So you have different motivations among different actors, and bringing that all together is extremely difficult. But giving the gravity of the moment, I think incremental process, which is there, is just not enough.
Fabian, a last thought on this, and then I want to move on to Ukraine.
I think it's very clear that yes, we are broadly moving in the right direction. But the key test for me is, are we making the difficult decisions? Are we jumping over our own shadow when it comes to some of these issues? And the indications are that that's not the case. And even at this summit, we've seen that on some of the crucial issues, we didn't make real progress. Rather, we're kicking the can down the road, hoping that maybe people don't notice. But issues which I would say are very urgent now, for example, the question about enlargement and whether Ukraine becomes a member state, are not seriously on the agenda.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let us move on. I want to come back later on to what all this means for the next summit, the more routine summit at the end of October, and what, if anything, whether that test that you just talked about are we making the difficult decisions, whether you think it will be met then. But we'll come back on that. In terms of Ukraine, again, quoting from Antonio Costa's letters to the leaders, he said, we need to talk about how we step up for support for Ukraine in a reliable and predictable manner. And this, of course, coming against the backdrop of as an apparent, a seeming possible, and I'm putting more caveats on it because you need to do this with Donald Trump, but a seeming change of heart over Russia and over Ukraine's capacity to win this war. Now, whether that means therefore we will support Ukraine and we are, losing patience with Russia, or whether it simply means the US saying, that's it, we've tried to broker a peace deal, we failed, Europe, it's all down to you now. Two questions there, really, Yanis. First of all, how is the EU reading what Donald Trump said and that apparent change of heart? Do they believe it is a real change of heart? Or, again, could he change his mind again tomorrow? And in terms of what they actually talked about at the summit, what was on the agenda?
Okay, not easy ones. Well, first of all, I think something which we have known even before Donald Trump started his second term as president is that he is extremely volatile in his positioning, that it's extremely difficult to trust him. Even now that he has made this change of heart, question is, will this be durable? Or will he change his mind again? But let's start from the fact that he has had this change of heart is better than if he would have been in full alliance with Putin, and things might have been moving in the wrong direction. So I think everyone is happy with the fact that the change of heart is, at least for the time being, going in the right direction. But what is clear is that you cannot count on Donald Trump. You cannot count on his administration, which means you need to do more autonomously in terms of your ability to defend the continent and so forth, which goes back to the previous discussion we had. So What to expect from Donald Trump and the US in the upcoming years, I think it's extremely difficult to give a sound prognosis. I think what you can be sure of is that you shouldn't expect too much. You should be happy if at least he doesn't undermine for example, the position of NATO, the stance of NATO. You should be happy if he doesn't agree with Putin above the heads of the Ukrainians and the Europeans on something. But he will not fill any gaps. He will only do so if it's still tit for tat. So the expectations with respect to Donald Trump should be rather low, and there are all these question marks. Now, with respect to Ukraine,
what they actually talked about,
yes.
how did they talk about
First of
supporting
all,
Ukraine?
first of all, yes, it was about increasing economic and military support to Ukraine, but they predominantly concentrated on issues of Europe's defense. But that again relates also to Ukraine because we're having this discussion also because, or predominantly because we have the war in Ukraine, and it relates to also the ability to support Ukrainians. So if we talk about setting up our defense capabilities, how we cooperate with Ukraine, how we involve the Ukrainians, also in EU tools. Obviously, that relates to Ukraine in itself. So there are strong links between discussing Europe's defense and support for Ukraine. But they were also supposed to discuss economic support, financial support, especially with respect to the frozen Russian assets and how to deal with it. I'm sure we'll talk about that in detail. But they actually did not have a real discussion about that. There was one speculation yesterday afternoon because they were talking so much about defense that they would come back after dinner and discuss the frozen asset issue then in detail. They didn't come back after dinner, and I suppose because they realized that the ideas which are now on the table, also coming from the Commission in more concrete terms of how it could look like, partially supported by the German Chancellor, that we are not there yet because there's opposition. So I think that they thought, okay, let's not come back to this issue. We will not be able to solve it. We need to make progress in the upcoming weeks towards the summit.
Yeah. Fabian, linking this to our previous conversation, do you believe, again, EU leaders have really woken up, particularly now focusing on the Ukraine issue, to the consequences not only of Trump's volatility, but even though this change of language, this change of an apparent frustration with Vladimir Putin, perhaps feeling he has been played by Vladimir Putin, but are EU leaders, when it comes to Ukraine, doing what's going to be needed to fill the gap left by the US, if, as expected, this doesn't translate into more support for Ukraine from America?
No, we're not doing enough. And what we are also still seeing is that every swerve of the Trump administration leads to renewed hope that maybe we don't have to do as much as we thought because America hasn't quite left us yet. I think this is extremely dangerous. In some sense, we need to be grateful to Putin at the moment because he's doing everything to prevent the US and Trump in particular to normalize the relationship. But if we are in a different place, who knows how quickly Trump is going to turn. And in any case, even if the broad direction of Trump might be a bit more favorable to Ukraine, it doesn't change the reality that the US is not willing anymore to invest into European defense and security. Ultimately, this is a job for us. So I think we have to do a lot more. We have to also recognize, and that's why it's strange when we see a discussion which talks about European capabilities without taking into account what Ukraine is already doing. Ukraine is the most important part of our eastern flank at the moment. It's not in NATO at the moment. We know why. But that doesn't mean we should ignore it. And we are discussing issues such as drone incursions, of which Ukraine is by far the most experienced of all the countries which are opposing Russia at the moment. So it shows that there still is a mismatch between the situation, the uncertainty, the volatility, and the threat which is there, and what we are actually doing in response.
On the frozen assets, Yanis, and this a discussion about how to use if and how to use some of Russia's 140 billion euros worth of frozen assets to support Ukraine defense. There did seem to be growing support for this idea, but there was a lot of pushback at the summit. What was the argument about? Who did the pushing back? And do you think they seem to have agreed to go on working on it, even though they couldn't agree on doing it? Do you think that they will eventually, that the momentum that seemed to be gathering behind this hasn't been stopped, it's merely been stalled temporarily?
Let me just add one sentence to
Sure.
what Fabian was saying, and then I'll come to the frozen assets. I think that many of us still think in the dimension of helping Ukrainians, helping Ukraine. And actually, it is about them fighting for us. So it's not helping them, it is them doing the job. And that we can profit from not only their defense capabilities, but the fact that they are fighting the fight. So I think the logic, the mindset needs to be that it is in our enlightened self-interest. It is not about showing solidarity. This is about us. Now, with respect to the frozen assets, this is a discussion we're having for a long time. And there have been different proposals on the table, also coming from different, including some thinking coming from the EPC, but also from others, of how to deal with the frozen assets. And this is something which I think is moving very slowly. I'm not sure, for example, that there will actually be a decision day, as Costa was indicating, at the end of the month of the European Council when it
This
comes
is
to
mainly to
frozen
do with
assets.
legal concerns, right?
It's not only legal
Oh,
concerns.
okay.
It is also concerns related to the financial markets, the signal it might be sending out. It's no coincidence that France and Italy, as high debt countries, are fearful of what signal that might be sending out. It's no coincidence that Luxembourg has some hesitations, to put it diplomatically, with respect to what might be happening, because it might undermine the euro. It's no coincidence that the ECB has also raised concerns that it might be affecting the euro's international standing. And the Belgians are critical of it because of Euroclear being headquartered in Belgium. So there are many reasons why there's opposition, but there's also a push to move in this direction. And if you look into the Commission proposal, you can see that it is, and they are trying to make that argument, that it is legally sound. It is not confiscating the Russian assets. It is using the Russian assets in a legally way, in order to use it as a collateral, in order to then issue via a special purpose vehicle zero coupon bonds to the Ukrainians. And if you look also to the reaction of Chancellor Merz in his FT piece the other day, he is supportive of the idea, and he's also saying of what the money should be used for. And if you see what he's proposing is to use the money also in our interest. It's about, common defense procurement. It's about them buying weapons from the Europe's defense industry. So even that, the money, the loan that would be going would be in our interest. So I think that there is movement. I think that we will overcome that movement at some point. We'll see how far actually then the frozen assets will be used, how big of an amount will actually be given to the Ukrainians over the upcoming years, what the conditions will be. But it is moving in this direction. And let's not forget, it's also because there are increasing funding pressures on member states, not only because of Ukraine, but in many ways. So they're trying to look for alternatives. But it's moving very slowly.
Sure. Fabian, please do comment on that if you want. But can you, relating to your previous comment about the drones in Ukraine, Ola Kirilova, I hope I didn't mispronounce that too much, Ola, said before the meeting in Copenhagen, the media reported that European countries were considering a plan to close the skies over part of Ukraine, meaning the interception of drones and missiles. Do you think this is actually possible? After all, says Ola, Ukraine has been calling for this for a long time. Could they close the skies, and how would that work if they could?
Um, Certainly, they could try to commit to it. I have very large doubts that that is going to happen.
Mm,
I don't really see the political momentum in the countries to commit to something like this. Also, because I think it would be seen as something which is risky.
mm,
And it raises also the question of if you cannot prevent these drones over your own territory, why would you be able to do this over the airspace of Ukraine? So I don't see this happening. And I know Ukraine has called for it for a long time, but there has also been resistance to doing
for a long
anything
time.
like this for a very long
Indeed.
time.
Indeed. Yanis, you wanted to say something there? And then I want to come on to the question of enlargement.
Well, yeah, if you see the reaction to the drone wall, and one reaction
Yeah.
being that we're technically not up to it, and it's too costly, and it will take too much time. We don't have the knowledge of how to deal with this, the technical knowledge. And by the way, the Ukrainians have much more knowledge when it comes to drone warfare because they are experiencing for years. So the question is also how we support the Ukrainians in enhancing their capacities to protect their skies when it comes also to drones. And there, the fact that 2 billion fresh money will be given to the Ukrainians, especially for drone warfare, is pointing in the right direction. But it is them doing the job because actually we are overwhelmed with doing the job. We're overwhelmed when it comes to protecting our own skies.
A quick question from Paul Taylor before we move on to the question of Ukraine's accession to the EU. Paul says, isn't the Commission proposing massive EU duplication with NATO defence planning? If so, what benefit does that bring for member states? Who would like to pick up on that one? Wave at me if you want to pick up on it. You're both smiling. Fabian has
Um,
the broader smile.
I mean, I think certainly it's very clear we don't need duplication. The question is whether there's something which can be done, which is coordinated with both the president in NATO and with the EU. Um, I don't see that we are really moving ahead very decisively in either area. So at the moment, my worry is not so much duplication, but that we're not actually doing it.
Doing it. Okay.
But clearly, there is a need for coordination. But we also have to bear in mind that we have to find new ways of doing things in NATO as well, because
Sure.
certainly the US is not going to be willing to foot the bill for any of this.
Yanis, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, well, first of all, Paul Taylor knows the question too is better than we do, but there is a need for a certain degree of duplication because there's also a question with respect to NATO and to the US role in NATO and how that affects NATO and its ability to operate. So I think a certain level of duplication will be necessary, but also between member states, among member states, there's the feeling that they need to duplicate capabilities because there is what I was saying earlier, a lack of trust in each other. Because if you think of it from a holistic perspective, that we can protect Europe and we have lead nations and they will take care of the capabilities gap, that assumes that you can start from the assumption that the other member states will play ball when it becomes difficult. And there are question marks whether this is actually the case. So a certain level of duplication is, unfortunately, is not rational, but it is necessary.
Okay. Okay, let us move on to the question of Ukraine's accession. And here we saw two proposals. Ursula von der Leyen had a proposal, basically different ways of working around Hungarian vetoes on getting the process started and making real progress. Ursula von der Leyen was talking more about making it a technical process, so trying to take the politics out of it, whereas Antonio Costa was talking about moving to qualified majority voting for opening chapters in negotiations, not for closing them, but for at least you could make some progress in that area. What was the reaction, Yanis, from member states to both those proposals? And is either of them likely to make any headway?
First of all, the starting point is that Ukrainians are delivering. They are making progress. The Commission has testified that, and they're making progress, and now it's up to us to deliver. And this is where the problem comes in terms of the veto. But that's the starting point. It's important to remember that. Now, as expected, the Hungarians, Orban, immediately reacted, saying, "Forget it. This will never happen. We will not agree, and we will not. You need a unanimity to change from unanimity to QMV, even to a super qualified QMV. So this won't happen with us." But interesting to see that there are also other member states who are opposed to it. And I think that's one reason why we've had this discussion, to showcase it's not only one member state, it's also others who are skeptical about it: the French, the Dutch, the Greeks, for different reasons, always for different reasons, and often nothing to do with Ukraine, by the way. But there's not only one member state which is critical of the question of giving up on their ability to veto the opening of negotiations, because they're using it themselves, or they might be wanting to use it in future. So it is about revealing that it's not only the Hungarians, it is a bigger problem, which then raises the question is, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that? And the technical solution, which the Commission is potentially putting forward, I say potentially because at the end of the month, they will come out with the pre-enlargement reviews, which we've been waiting for since March, and they will also adopt the enlargement strategy. So we will see what will be included in that. And I think it was also a test to see how far you can go at the European level, how far you can go in getting rid of the unanimity rule, in order to see what the Commission will then present and what might be more feasible following the discussion, because it has shown that it's not only one country which is problematic; it is a more difficult process. But that
So
doesn't
in a
solve.
sense,
But that doesn't solve our problem.
no. And in a sense, therefore, Fabian, this was a sort of, I was going to ask, does it mean that both proposals, both ideas to do this weren't fully formulated and consulted enough on in advance? But if would you agree, I think, with Yanis' analysis, where he's suggesting they needed to put this out there to see what the mood music was and where the room for manoeuvre is? How are you reading this? Because in the end, there will have to be some sort of workaround, won't there?
It's actually something we have proposed in EPC for quite some time, that not so much to test the grant, because I think it was rather clear what the reaction would be, but to also show that we are not going to make progress. It is a promise we have made to Ukraine, but we are going to struggle to fulfill that promise. And it is not, and I think this is really important that we emphasize this, it is not just the Hungarian veto. Clearly, that is an issue, but it is also a fig leaf, which many other countries are hiding behind, because they also don't want to make fast progress. And I think what we are going to have to do is to now say, okay, given that is the situation, what can we do? What are constructive steps forward, which include, for example, coalitions of the willing on certain issues, which includes involving Ukraine much more into decision making, for those countries who want Ukraine to join quickly, to already tie them into European structures as much as possible. That's not going to be easy. It's also disappointing because we had promised something different. But I think, unfortunately, what Copenhagen showed is that it is the reality.
So how this will be received in Ukraine, Yanis?
Well, I think Ukrainians know how difficult this is. They know that there is opposition. So it's not that this comes as a surprise. Is it frustrating? I think it is frustrating. I feel that it is frustrating because just in addition to something you said, Jackie, Costa had consultations. He toured capitals before the informal summit. And on one of his agenda points was also this question of how to deal with QMV or unanimity when it comes to negotiations. So it is something that had been discussed. So he probably also knew what to expect when putting it or when having this on the table. But to put what Fabian was saying in a more blunt terms, we're talking about enlargement being a geopolitical imperative. Some even say it's a historical imperative. And that obviously is triggered by the situation in Ukraine. And the reality is, we're not serious. We are not at the moment where we have understood that this is a historical imperative. We're not where we were after 89, 90. And it took us a while to get to that point where we had understood the EU must enlarge. It is a necessity, and also necessity from our perspective, from the old member states, not from those who want to join. We're not there yet, and that is very unfortunate. And this is another test of times which we seem to be failing.
Okay, thank you very much on that. It was one other issue. It wasn't the summit agenda, as I say, was focusing on defense readiness, was focusing on Ukraine, but Gaza, because we have seen this peace plan that's been proposed by Donald Trump. We've also seen a growing number of European countries, EU member states and non-EU, moving to recognize the Palestinian state in recent weeks. What is your reading of the EU, how the EU is reacting to all of this, and whether it has any role to play here, whether there's anything it can do, or is it just simply, it doesn't matter, we can produce fine summit conclusions, say what we like, but actually it makes no difference at all. You're reading now, Fabian, of where we are and where the EU stands, particularly in this context of growing recognition of the Palestinian state.
I think what we've seen over the last month is that the balance has shifted inside the EU, that a number of countries have become tougher on Israel after what they've seen, including also the recognition, which a number of countries have now taken forward. So that is a shift. It doesn't mean that there is now a unanimous view on how to progress. There are still differences which persist among the member states. I think the key now has been that the peace plan has been widely endorsed. Whatever apprehensions member states might have in private, in public, they're very clearly supportive of moving ahead in this direction. We have no idea yet whether it will work or not. There are still a lot of uncertainties associated with it. There's a question of whether the different parties in this are going to act in good faith or not, whether they're actually going to do what they're committing to. There are domestic political issues also in Israel. So there's a number of things happening. But with all of that, to put it very bluntly, Europe doesn't really play a role. We are watching from the sidelines. We will certainly be asked to come up with money for whatever the next step is going to be. But are we influencing the outcome of any of this? I would say not at all.
Yanis, a word on this?
I concur with Fabian. In terms of our stance, Fabian described it. You have a lot of quotes from different EU leaders and players at the European level being very supportive of the plan, but you have also a lot of question marks. question marks related to the fact that it is a plan which excludes the Palestinians in the negotiations. It is a take or leave it. It is something where there are big question marks with respect to how to implement such a plan, whether that would work. Also, if you look into what has been proposed in terms of the ones who should be implementing the plan led by Donald Trump himself, that won't work. Where the money will be coming from, who will be paying for all this. So there are huge, big question marks, very fundamental question marks regarding the 20-point plan.
And in terms
But
of
on the other
the
hand, there
EU,
is strong support, but the EU's role is marginal, yes.
well, I was going to say, and does that, how important is that when we talk about the EU as a geopolitical actor? The fact that it is so marginalized, the fact that actually it doesn't matter, we're on the sidelines. How important is that, Yanis, do you think?
It is very important because it is indicative and also seen from the outside of what the potential role of Europe will be. We're not talking about something which is happening far away from Europe. It's happening in front of our doorstep. Just look at the map and look where Cyprus is. So this is something which is so close to us. It is so much of significance for us because it's so close and it has so many repercussions if things do not work out at very different levels. And we're de facto a non-player. But if you look into the Middle East, since the 70s, going back to European political cooperation, this has always been something where member states are divided. They cannot make up their mind. Only when there is something which has been decided by others can they then agree on, as Fabian was indicating, on how we can help by providing technical assistance, financial assistance, support to a plan being implemented. When it comes to being a player, we have never been a player. So that's not big news. However, in the changing world, in the world landscape we are living in, this is more of a bad news than it has been already in the past.
Indeed. I just wanted to ask you one other thing. The European political community meeting today. Why are they meeting? What are they talking about? And I mean, the original idea that Emmanuel Macron had for the European political community, I mean, is it living up to it at all? Does it serve any useful purpose? Or has it become a box-ticking exercise? Who would like to come in first on that?
Whatever.
I'm happy to come in, although it's I have to say it's not very positive. I think whatever the ideas were behind it, I don't see that very much is coming out of it, and that in part is also because it's not very clear where this sits in the overall framework. Is it about like-minded countries working together? Is it about finding something which complements EU cooperation? Is it a political pendant to NATO? Whatever it might be, there are things which remain unclear, and frankly, I don't see that many people are even talking about it. It's noted as this is happening, but do we see anywhere that these are outcomes which are coming out of the epoch meeting? So, from my perspective, it is already something which, yes, has a repetitive character, because once you have established something, you have to keep going. But is it really producing something?
So, Yanis,
No,
a good idea poorly executed because not well defined enough, or pointless and therefore a bad idea, which, as Fabian says, now just has a life of its own, but frankly serves no useful purpose. Could it be a vehicle? Could it serve a useful purpose if it was used in the right way?
It could have, but it doesn't. The thing is, does it do any harm? No. Is there a need for a forum bringing together leaders from this big variety of countries? Yes, there is a need to have something of that sort. Is EPOC, we still call it EPOC and not EPC.
Indeed.
We will be the last ones
They
doing
stole
so.
your
But
acronym.
yeah, well, and the European Political Cooperation acronym, no? The EPC of the 70s and 80s. But okay,
We can feel
just
their
shows.
pain, can't we?
Yeah. But you see also the historical ignorance. But jokes aside, there is a need for something of that sort. But actually, if you see what EPC EPOC is at the end producing, it is very limited. And there have been ideas on the table of how to make it stronger, how to also institutionalize in a way where it makes a difference. But that's not something which those who are participating want, or many are opposing to it, to put it more bluntly. And if it wouldn't be for President Macron, so the question is, what happens after Macron? Will it still continue then? Question mark. So it's not doing any harm, but it's not producing the results it could be. And I have severe doubt, if there's no massive change, that it will be what some people argue a part of Europe's future security architecture. It might be an element, but it won't be a decisive part.
Okay, let's, before we close, look ahead now. And you both talked about, you said, Yanis, earlier, we are failing the test of times. Fabian, you talked about what is the test. The test is, are we taking the difficult decisions? When we look ahead to the more routine European Council on October the 23rd, do you expect anything concrete to come out of that? I mean, it would seem that not enough progress. This was supposed to be the summit that laid the ground for the formal decisions to be taken in October. But from everything you've said over the last hour, it would seem not enough progress has been made to be able to take concrete decisions at that summit. Yanis, and then a final thought from you, Fabian. What for you? So how do you think it will play out? And what for you would indicate that the next summit is living up to the test of times? Yanis first, and then final word to Fabian.
It won't live up to the test of times because of the reasons we have been discussing, not only today, but also over the past months or years. Will it be, the historic moment to take decisions, as Costa is indicating? He's putting really pressure on EU leaders to take decisions. I doubt it. I think they will take decisions. There will be certain progress. It will also be sold as being a major, it will move in the right direction. They will be watering down some of the proposals which are included in the scoping paper of the Commission. So it will be, again, what we have been seeing, very slow progress in the right direction, but always not enough coming too late. That's how I would summarize it.
And what for you would be a sign that we are finally living up to the test of times?
If they would be really supportive of what the Commission and the High Representative have put on the table, and in one or two areas take decisions where we know that they have severe differences, including, for example, on the assets, the frozen assets we were discussing about, or taking concrete, ambitious decisions with respect to what milestones could be when it comes to defense capabilities, and being very concrete in one or two or three areas. But I think that they will have difficulties in overcoming their differences, and the lack of ambition won't be high enough.
Fabian, can you put any more of a positive view on this? Or for you,
But I said there's progress, Jackie.
Indeed.
I said there's progress.
Yes. Indeed. You talked about that key test. What do you expect to come out of the October summit? And for you, could it begin at least? Let's put the ambitions more modestly. Could it begin to meet that test that you have set?
I'm going to be even a bit more negative, because I think we have to recognize that we might be in a worse place by the time we get to that summit. Who knows what is going to happen in the White House between now and then? Who knows what Russia is going to do over the next weeks? So I think we also have to recognize that the external environment, if anything, is getting worse, not better. So in that context, yes, we are going to make some incremental progress. It's almost impossible not to, but to really address the big questions. And I think this is also where we see a very distinctive lack of leadership from the member states. If there are issues which they feel very strongly about, where's going to be the activity over the next weeks to find a political deal, to bring people on board, to create alliances which push, whether it's the frozen assets or enlargement or whatever it might be. I rather think that what we are going to see is this passivity, which we have seen before, where in the end, member states, even the ones who are supporting some of these processes, will say, well, we tried, but it wasn't possible to do so. And frankly, that's not good enough. We don't live in a world where we can afford this.
Indeed not. And we will come back to all of this and discuss whether at that October summit, EU leaders have begun to live up to that test of times at the next EPC update and post-summit briefing, which will take place on October the 24th, immediately after that summit. In the meantime, a couple of events, a couple of publications to flag up. Publications, 2 new commentaries related to the issues we've been discussing today. One, shooting down an enemy aircraft is far from simple under international law, and a second one on from dual use to omni-use, securing Europe's future. And events, next Monday, October the 6th, an election monitor event on the Czech parliamentary elections, what future for EU unity, and on October the 10th, an EPC thought leadership forum with Matthew Whitaker, the US ambassador to NATO. So Fabian, Yanis, thank you very much as always. Thank you to you for joining us, and we look forward hopefully to seeing many of you at our next update on October the 24th. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.